Good. So I am Carlisle Levine, and I want to welcome you um, to this webinar along with my colleague Hippolyte Pohl. We are co-leading the the Strengthening Evaluation Contracting Partnerships Initiative. Um, this is our fourth webinar. We're really thrilled to be here with our friends from the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies and from WithInsight. And so, first of all, we just want to tell you a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about what we're going to do, and we'll get started. Okay. Um, so first of all, we're pleased to have you here for this webinar, our Strengthening Evaluation Contracting Partnerships Initiative. It starts with a premise that evaluators who are more proximate and geographically, demographically, in terms of issue areas, to an initiative or system that is being evaluated, are better placed to understand the problems being addressed, how they're being addressed, and how effective, relevant those initiatives are. Our initiative seeks to influence how partnerships with small and solo proximate evaluators are fostered and managed so that we can all benefit from the unique insights that proximate evaluation firms. Before we go any further, we're very curious to know who we have in the room. So we're going to launch a poll, 2 questions. And with those questions, we'll get a better sense of who you are. So let me just launch that poll. And let's see who's in the room. Does everyone see the poll? We see a few questions being answered. If everyone could mute, that would be great. Okay, does everyone see the poll? All right, it looks like we have a lot in the United States so far. Let's see who else is answering.
Yeah,
Okay, please, we're gonna mute folks if you're. There we go. Okay. All right. So far, I think we might close the poll. Any other responses? Let's see what we got. All right, so it looks like the vast majority of folks here are in Canada and the US, with a little representation from Africa, Europe, and Latin America. And that we have a more even distribution between funders and small firms, with a good representation of proximate firms and nonprofits. So that's great. Okay, good to know who's in the room. We thank you all for being here. Just a quick note on the agenda. We're going to start with a little background on SECP, which Hippolyte will provide. Then we're going to have a conversation with our guests, Liz and Pam from Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies and Nora from WithInsight. After that, we'll have breakout room time for everybody. We'll come back for some Q&A. As we go along, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will address them during our Q&A time. Good? Okay, Hippolyte, over to you for some background on who we are and what we're doing.
Thank you everyone for coming in to join in this webinar, which is the fourth in a series that we've run so far. Now, the name SECP, you might remember, is Strengthening Evaluation Contracting Partnerships Initiative. It didn't always start with that name. Way back a few years ago, Carla and I were talking about our experiences operating as small solo firms, trying to win space in the evaluation field to provide the unique services that we thought we had. But every time we faced challenges, because of the policies and practices that evaluation contracting firms had. And so we thought that probably this is not an issue that is for the two of us alone, but it could be applicable to several other people of our kind operating in our field. And so we thought to put together our thoughts in an open letter that was addressed to funders, and which we published, basically complaining, as it were, about the challenges that we faced as small solo evaluation firms. But we're surprised to see that the letter got a lot of traction, not only among funders, but also among small solo firms around the world who found reason why this was an important piece of dialogue to have. And so we moved beyond that letter to start organizing webinars, publishing blogs, an article in the Foundation Review. Again, all of the time trying to generate discussions around the issues of how do we improve the field of evaluation contracting so that small solo firms can partner effectively with the bigger evaluation firms as well as the funding agencies to provide the unique services that we bring on board based on our location and based on the kind of knowledge and networks that we have. So we have organized 4 of those seminars. We have been pivoting gradually away to focus on small solo evaluation firms alone to also try to understand from the perspective of the commissioners of evaluations, the foundations, and other people, what are some of the things that they are doing to bring in small solo firms in the evaluation space? What are the challenges that they are facing? And therefore, how can we work together to be able to address those challenges? So today we are happy to have our panelists, from the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies and WithInsight, who have had experience partnering together and are willing to share it with us today. We're hoping that our sharing can start as well with some conversations, sharing our experiences as well as a group here, and being able to move this agenda forward so that together we can create a better, safer space for effective partnership for evaluations that matter. Thank you very much, and I hand over back to Carla.
Thanks, Hippolyte. So Liz and Pam and Nora, we're so glad that you are with us today. I'm going to give you a little spotlight, bring you on in. We appreciate that you all have been on this journey, Liz and Pam at Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, and we are thrilled to have Nora with us as one of your partners who can talk about her experience partnering with you. So as partnering with evaluators with firsthand knowledge of the topics and context and communities on and in and which funders work can give funders access to deep and nuanced understanding of the relevance, effectiveness, sustainability of their efforts. And yet, funder selection and contracting practices aren't always well set up for these kinds of partnerships. So Liz and Pam, Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies values working with evaluators who are proximate to your work, whether thematically, demographically, or geographically. And Nora, you have been partnering with Liz and Pam as a consultant for a number of years. So Liz and Pam, we'd welcome hearing about MACP's journey developing external evaluator selection and contracting practices that support these partnerships. And Nora, we would welcome hearing from your experience partnering with MACP. Liz and Pam, let's start with you. Could you please provide a brief overview of MACP and its work and explain why you are on this journey? Why is strengthening partnerships with small and solo proximate evaluators important to you?
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to join this conversation today. I'm Liz Kruger with Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. MACP is a newer private philanthropic organization that funds in the United States and globally. And we have an evaluation and learning team of 4 staff here at MACP. And we're focused on stewarding equitable evaluation and learning for MACP to adapt to a changing world. I use MACP as our shorthand for Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies because that's a mouthful. So I want to start the conversation today by positioning us and our work. We're going to be describing our experiences as US-based white women who are working in philanthropic grant making and evaluation and learning. And what small proximate firms means to us when we work in one of our domestic program areas in the Midwestern part of the United States. And we recognize that this is a very localized example. Our aim is to contribute to this dialogue that Hippolyte was just describing, this larger global conversation. We want to bring forward an example that's United States based and about work in Midwestern communities that received private philanthropic funding to support a range of partners who are dedicated to a strong teacher workforce in the public education system. Over the past decade, MACP's evaluation and learning approach has been decentralized and really customized to each of our program strategy areas of grant making. Our program teams lead their evaluation and learning work around their grant making in a way that's really interdependent with our internal evaluation and learning team. Over that same time frame, our internal evaluation and learning team has really developed extensive expertise in partnering with our program teams to source evaluation and learning consultants, as well as we've directly sourced evaluation consultants for our own work. We recognize that evaluation and learning requires a really deep understanding of local contexts and the people involved. Understanding that culture, that history, the language, and the lived experiences is really essential to better understanding why things work or don't. And that really requires digging into the context, the social structures, the power dynamics, and all the unspoken assumptions. MACP has often sought partnerships with small proximate consulting partners, since we see the benefits of working with smaller firms given their connections to the communities that they know and belong to, and including in some cases have language or cultural knowledge. MACP has engaged and partnered with a number of small proximate local evaluation firms over the past decade. Some have been proximate by geography, others with demographic or issue area proximity. And one of these consultants, Nora Robinson, with a small firm WithInsight, we are really thrilled to have joined us for this conversation on the webinar today. At MACP, we see our evaluation and learning consultants not simply as contracted vendors, but as partners who have a really important perspective about our approach and the impact of our grant making. MACP is a really highly relational organization and places a really high value on engagement with our grantee and consulting partners. And this approach to engagement and partnership is really rooted in our organizational cultural values and our donors' intent.
Thanks, Liz. That's great. It's great hearing about the why. It's very inspiring. And now it'll be great to hear about how you've put that why into practice. So can you please talk about how you approach selecting, contracting, partnering with evaluation firms to welcome them in and build those partnerships with small firms? What's working well? What challenges have you addressed? And in what ways are you still growing? So to you, Liz and Pam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pam Napolt, and I'm also on the eval and org learning team at Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. I'm happy to be here today. And just to build on some of what Liz has shared about kind of our situation, I want to just bring us back to the year 2019, and the Center for Evaluation Innovation held a roundtable that we were able to participate in. And part of that roundtable was that they invited small proximate firm representatives to join that roundtable conversation. And that was a real turning point for us because we were able to be in a breakout session with individuals who had joined the conference. And they shared stories about what it takes for them as a small firm to submit fully developed proposals in a very short time frame. And that was an eye-opener for me. I think I could have assumed some of that, but to hear the direct experience was pretty powerful. And they told us, if we really want to strengthen partnerships with firms like theirs, we could consider using requests for qualifications instead of RFPs. And so, they described using more of a letter of intent, some brief descriptions about their approaches, maybe an introduction to their team members, and then some examples or some samples of their work would be easier and more kind of reasonable for them to pull together in a few weeks. And so we tested this out and we found out that, guess what? We can gather really important information from those set of materials that then leads to a conversation. And then that can move into proposal development. And in many cases, we've moved proposal development into the discovery phase of the project itself so that it's paid time. And they also talked to us about that it costs money to develop proposals, and to be reimbursed for that work is really important for their business. So, and we realized that any proposal submitted too early in the process is probably going to be revised anyway. So it was a win-win. We also heard that it's really great to be transparent about the budget right away. And so we worked with our program directors who generally manage those contracts and manage the budgets that pay for that work, to be able to say, here's a range of what we think is available for this work, to put that right into that request for qualifications. And I think that too has eliminated a lot of confusion, misunderstanding, has helped us focus on what the body of work is. I guess another thing, in addition to the budget and moving to an RFQ, something that our internal eval and org learning team has been working on is that obviously we don't have all the small proximate firms on our radar. And so we own that we need to continue to grow our awareness of who's out there, especially in certain geographies, where some of our programs are directly contracting with the evaluators. In some of our programs that are working in a different way, often our grantee partners are the ones that are doing that contracting. And so we know that there are those differences across our organization. And so we try to pay attention to those areas where we know program directors are coming to us and asking for ideas. So we that's kind of our network. We try to provide options when work comes up to internally. And then we've also found ourselves doing some cold calls and reaching out to people we don't know. And so one approach that I just will describe really quickly is that we were doing new work in Southeast Alaska, and Liz and another team member spent several weeks doing those kind of cold calls and inviting conversation from small proximate firms working in Southeast Alaska. And that generated, new relationships. It resulted in a contract with a firm that we didn't know of until they had done that work. And so that was again a win-win, I think. Finally, for the consultants that we don't select, when we have an RFQ process, we offer an opportunity for us to talk, and to give feedback, both to give them some transparency about why they weren't selected, and also ask them what it was like to submit their materials to us. That's been a great relationship builder. Those calls are always really great uses of time, and generally lead to something else. So those are just a few examples.
Thank you for that. Liz, I wonder if you could talk about what's working particularly well.
Yes, thank you. Sure can. I think a lot of what Pam just described is a big part of what's working well, and our kind of interest in continuing to reflect on our practice, and experiment and try some new practices. I think some other things that are working well is when we have really clear lines of communication and a shared understanding about the work to be done, as Pam was just describing, that opportunity to do a proposal development more in conversation. And so this really looks like developing really strong scopes of work with both the funder and the consultant being clear about what each needs to contribute to the strength and success of the partnership. I think we've learned that for some smaller firms, that could look like things like a certain payment schedule, a percentage of the contract paid at the project launch, clarity about what the final product needs to look like and final deliverable needs to look like, depending on the type of audience and what sort of kind of polish or formatting it needs to have. Or even our process around amendments to the contract, as sometimes adaptations to the project emerge and have to change the terms of the project. Creating feedback loops is also, I think, working well. We have sought feedback from our consultants on our contracting process and practices at MACP. We believe when we seek out and listen to consultant partners' perspectives, we benefit from richer insights and better results, and it brings more integrity to our work. And the insights we receive from the feedback can result in actions we can take to strengthen our partnerships going forward. And we've also really been listening and paying attention to all the sector conversations on this topic. We pay attention to what other philanthropic and consulting organizations are learning through their practice and in working with evaluation consultants. The roundtable in 2019 that Pam described was one example of one of those conversations, but even more recently, just this May, At the Grantmakers for Effective Organizations Learning Conference, there was a series of conversations and presentations on this topic that I think were really important to letting a broader array of folks think about practice in contracting, especially with smaller, more proximate firms.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz. And Pam, when you talk about the other side, what challenges are you addressing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's one that I'll just mention before we bring Nora into the conversation, and that is we recently asked a group of consultants to give us feedback. So those that had been working with us for over the last 10 years, and so we gathered with the help of a couple of our own consulting partners that group, and we heard we're making progress, which was great. We also heard that as a larger funder, that we're really great at asking for feedback and we're great at reflecting, and that they're encouraging us to take more action. And so they said, you know, the moving from reflection to action in terms of the feedback that they're giving us about what it is like to work with us is something that they encourage us to get stronger at. And so that's something that we're doing a lot of internal sense making around that feedback, and it's very helpful. It's really helpful to hear that from external partners and to get that reflected back to us. I'd like to move into introducing everybody to Nora Robinson, if I could. So Nora is the co-founder of WithInsight, and this is a consulting firm that is located in different areas. She can describe that of the country, and it helps organizations improve through evaluation. And so the WithInsight team does evaluation coaching and external evaluation services, and then they also have an expertise in working with groups on data utilization, which has been a great addition to the work that they're doing with us. They've partnered with MACP since around 2017. They've designed trainings for our staff, they've facilitated grantee input in our aging program, and they're currently working with our teachers and students domain. And specifically around preparation, education, and development of a teacher's workforce, that program area has been working closely with them. They were instrumental in helping us negotiate data sharing, I'd love it, Nora, if you could talk more about this, because this was a new area for us, and their ability to kind of adapt to what we needed to get, to learn about, and to adapt to what our grantee partners needed around technical assistance was a huge addition to the work that they're doing. So Nora, would like to turn it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and Hippolyte and Carlisle for leading this movement, if you will, on behalf of consultants everywhere. I've very much appreciated preparing for this and reading and thinking about this, and it's very energizing. So thank you, MACP, for welcoming me into this as your partner. Sure, I can ground us just like in a couple things about our firm, since we're talking about small proximate firms, and then speak to our experience with MACP. So I'm located in Minneapolis, and my business partner is located in the Boston area, and we work with nonprofits and foundations, government, schools all across the country. So with a variety of subcontractors that help us. So hopefully that helps you just get a sense of like size and where we are. The work that Pam is referring to, I can get into that a little bit more, but I think the proximate nature in that particular project was about having really deep knowledge of education systems and having a lot of experience working across a variety of angles to education systems. So the way that philanthropy, the way that nonprofits work within and around school systems, and then also internally how school and district systems work and work with universities, etc. So I think that experience was probably the proximity that was most valuable or most important in the project that we've been engaged with for the longest amount of time at MACP. But we've had a variety of different experiences and some different projects with different departments at MACP. Though I do want to just caveat that it's a large organization and there's a lot of people and domains that I have not participated in. So I just should say that as well, that, still my scope with MACP is maybe somewhat narrow in the grand scheme of things. So the values that I think Liz and Pam touched on many things that I would just highlight from my own experience. First and foremost, being that our relationship with MACP has always felt like a true partnership. And I think that's mainly because of feeling like real thought partners. And they talked about this, but really seeing their grantees as well as their consultants as thought partners, coming alongside them to do the work and to think about it differently and to bring in more proximate perspective on how to do this as best as they can. And so I've always felt like my expertise and insights are very valued and welcomed and sought out and appreciated, similarly to how I see them acting that way with grantees. So that's probably the kind of at its foundation, what builds all the rest of kind of the experience we've had. It's just I would say a spirit of generosity in a lot of different facets within their organization. So it is very relational. I think that's a critical value here in my positive experiences with clients have been those that are highly relational, where there is a strong emphasis on learning. I mean, our organization's whole purpose is to help the social sector learn and grow so that they can better meet their mission. And I think the more our clients have a spirit of learning and want to deeply and generously learn and grow, the better that goes. And that has certainly been the case for MACP. And I've seen that evolve, back when we started in 2017. We didn't say this at the top, but MACP is a fairly young organization, fairly young philanthropic entity. So that was kind of in its earlier phase when we started. And I think we've seen a lot of moving from more internal to external. And with that, like a more opening up to learning and feedback that comes with also building Liz's team, where, they're putting a real emphasis and investment on learning and evaluation over the years. And I would say just with that comes like a deep listening, and that's a value I've always felt from the folks I've worked with at MACP, is that they are deep listeners, which is a really important quality in evaluation and extremely important as a funder. And I think that has been paramount in many of the different experiences I've had along the way. And they talked about that with listening to feedback, even when consultants are asking like, hey, why didn't I get the project? Can you tell me more? I've never had, when I've asked for feedback from a project that I didn't get, I've never gotten feedback, and I know I would get it from MACP. So that's, just one thing that stands out right away. So that's the kind of value, Carlisle. I can shift to maybe the specific practices that we've experienced. I think many of them are highlighted in Hippolyte and Carlisle's article and in the work, but My most recent experience applying for a project with MacP fell into that kind of new way of framing things up that Pam talked about, where it was a letter of intent with references. And that is so different and so much more enjoyable to apply to than a full traditional RFP with lots and lots and lots of hoops to go through. And it matters in the sense that from a time and investment perspective, I think that LOI process with them probably all said and done was maybe 5 hours and of my time put into that compared to what I would say is 15 to 20 on an average RFP, not to mention my business partner also weighing in her time. So, it really, that kind of stuff really adds up and really makes a difference. And though we didn't get that project, it was a really positive experience um, and one that if that was what I think we would go for a lot more projects if that's what every experience was like, because it was much more manageable and transparent as well. And references in many ways, I think, are a better testament to your work than a bunch of writing in an RFP. So I also just think that's a really smart way to go about getting information on a potential consultant. And, things like the month-long or longer timeline. Most RFPs we see, we have a couple weeks at the most, maybe even just a week. So having that longer timeline, having that longer, the projects themselves that MacP does are typically a longer timeline with a very adequate budget to support it. And I think what the difference that makes when you do receive those projects is that they're more rewarding for the consultant, and they provide, of course, like the sustainability and the runway, but they also provide like such a deeper relationship with the client, with in this case with MacP, and with the grantees, and that's just a very rewarding experience compared to a much more transactional, short-term experience that I've had sometimes with others. So I appreciate that. And that's also just the nature of how they operate, that deeply long-term relational work with grantees. So let's see, I would say we also really value our project management style and capacity and being able to take some of the burden off of that with our clients. And I think that's a thing Liz talked about, just being really clear and communicative in the scope about who's going to do what and roles and how we're going to work together. And I think they do a really nice job facilitating that conversation and generating that cooperatively as opposed to making assumptions. And at times I've felt like a little bit over micromanaged by a client. And I think MacP puts a lot of trust in their consultants, but with good communication going into that and good boundary building around what those roles and responsibilities are going to look like. But just a very high level of trust is felt for me personally, has been felt throughout the process. I love having, I don't like Liz and Pam's team is something that we have access to, and can kind of bounce ideas off of them as other evaluators internally who are focused on learning. And that has been a really nice asset for having that. Not every organization has that type of leadership internally, and that's been really, really important around different like kind of turning points to the grantee cycle. And that's that spirit of generosity that I'm talking about, where I feel like there's a lot of, and we can provide, this and these other things that add richness and depth to the way that the work unfolds. They also are just incredibly generous as being a reference to us along the way, which has made a those things matter when you're a consultant. Having testimonials and references and other people speaking to and talking about your work and sharing that with others, and really have appreciated that. And in terms of how it's evolved, I mean, I spoke to this a little bit, but I do think that uh, some of the building out the evaluation and learning team, and also just like finding its identity over the years as an organization, and who, like any organization in its infancy and in its startup phase, is, going to be in a different place than it will be when it's maturing. But I think they've gone out of their way, especially Liz and Pam's leadership, to be very outward facing and very like embedding themselves in community and a lot of events and a lot of places where thought is innovating. And they've made an intentional practice around building emergent learning into their organization and trust-based philanthropy and a variety of things that I think do have a really positive impact on the way that they partner with others. And I've felt that and seen that in changes along the way. And I think in the early phase, people would have maybe felt like it was there were other funders in the field that were more predominant and more known, and now I feel like MACP is really leading a lot of this ways of being that is different for grantees, and this is an example of where they're extending that to consultant partners as well. And I was a part of a process where they did deep listening with consultants, which Pam referred to, of getting feedback about our experiences over the years. And I've never had another funder do that type of thing to get my insights in such a way that was deeply qualitative. So I think it's been a different experience and super, super positive. Not to say there aren't, ways to grow and evolve, but I've felt like it's been a true partnership.
Nora, thank you. Liz, Pam, thank you for being willing to share your evolving journey with us. It takes a lot to come out here and reveal that, and then the path along the way. And Nora, we always want to have actually a small solo proximate partner with the foundation to keep everybody honest. And so it's great to have you here and to hear your experience working with MACP. This is now going to be an opportunity for you all to talk to each other. Something that we've heard from everybody is that you guys want to get to know each other. Nora, Pam, and Liz, you were saying, sometimes we just don't know where to find the evaluators with whom we want to partner. So these breakout rooms are going to be in part that, part for you to talk. You have a lot of expertise in this room for you to discuss these very questions. So
Group 3, which basically asked, what would it take to make foundations pick up the example of MACP, that they are willing to work with small solo firms? What needs to happen? So that was a question that I was asking. Robert, do you want to speak to that question so that everybody can hear what you had in mind?
Okay, putting me on the spot.
Yes.
Well, I was very taken with the point MacP made about their learning that it worked well not to call for proposals in advance. And that resonated very much with my own experience. I was telling the group that even at times, if I do apply to a call for proposals, I kind of refuse to write the proposal. So I'll write and I'll say, we could, given the topic, we could do this, we could do that, but there's no ways I'm going to tell you how I think it should be done, because we have to talk about it together. And that just seems to work so much better. And so I was very taken with your comments about that and thought, well, what is it frightening for funders or commissioners of evaluations to do that? Or what is it that stops them from doing that? I thought it was very interesting, and I also your point about being transparent about the budget and the amount of time and energy that saves for everyone. I just loved.
Mm, mm, mm. Thank you very much, Barbara, for highlighting that. Any thoughts on that?
I can offer
Anybody has a
one.
question?
Yeah, one quick
Yes.
response on that. I think it's such an important point about the proposals. And just one thing that I've been thinking about with that is we've had conversations as we were making that transition about how when a funder is writing, a request for proposals, they're really being prescriptive about what they think they need. And I think one of our learnings has been we don't always know what we need. Part of why we're bringing in evaluation and learning expertise through consultant partners is for their ideas, is for their innovation, is for their expertise, whether it's in certain methods or certain approaches. And so if we're essentially asking contractors to just respond to our best thinking, we're not going to get necessarily their best thinking. We're just going to get a mirror held back up to us. And that's not what adds a lot of value. And so I think some of the most important, or one of the most important things with that shift to the RFQs for us as a funder is also seeing all the innovation, all the creativity, all the ideas that consultants can bring and suggest. And I think a number of our projects have really been more emergent projects, as Nora was describing, where we don't always just say, hey, this is exactly what we need. It needs to be done in exactly this way. We want to co-create that. And so I think that's been a key part of why the qualifications process and the letters of intent have worked a lot better for us, because then we can actually get into that co-creation space and hear, given the constraints of the budget and the deadlines, kind of how this project could unfold and what the methods and approach should be.
Thank you very much, Liz. In our group, Austin was describing the kind of process he went through to almost get to where you are now, MacP. And he talks about internal resistance that was part of the process that he had to overcome. Did you guys have any internal resistance to making this change, MacP?
Well, that's a great question. I think that part of what we have going for us is the startup nature of the evaluation and learning work in the last decade. And so we did not have a track record or a history of how things were done. And I think that a lot of perhaps other funders have that kind of weight of this is how things have been done, that it's a little bit of an uphill battle to make those kinds of changes in the organization where we just didn't have that history to, that was weighing against us. And yeah, so I guess I would point to that. And also because part of what is so important, and you've probably heard this from us loud and clear today, is the relationships that we have with our grantee partners are also long-term. And so that's a very relational approach to grant making. And I think we were easily able to apply that to our consulting partnerships as well.
Thank you very much. Before we went into the breakout rooms, there were a couple of questions in the chat, and I'd like to bring them forward now. There were questions basically around how do you do your solicitation? How do you find people to approach? I think you spoke to that about reaching out to them. But there were questions also about the criteria you use for the selection and deciding on proposals and so forth. Can you speak a little more to that? What do you look for in the small solo firms that apply to you for assignments?
Sure, we have a pretty standard list that that I think we use to kind of as a boilerplate to get started. Things that I think you would expect in terms of like an ability to translate information to audiences, an ability to work with grantee partners. We're finding Facilitation skills are paramount. Oftentimes the the evaluation and the learning partners are facilitating a lot of processes. And whether that be with our grantee partners in a convening, oftentimes they're leading convenings in partnership with our program teams, and they're often facilitating our internal discussions and learning and development about how the project is going to be designed. And so that usually shows up on that list. And then depending on the stage of the program team and where they are in their evaluation and learning journey with their grantee partners, that stage calls for a certain skill set. So if it's very early in strategy development, we're usually looking for somebody who has that content expertise. A good example is, we have a music education program that is just kind of getting going with thinking about strategy, and the person who is hired to work is very much ensconced in music education in terms of their background. So it varies, I guess, depending on the stage, but then there are a few core pieces that stay the same.
Thank you. There was a question also from Ariana about the risks that you have to take to bet on small solo firms, And her question was, what if something goes wrong and they are not able to deliver? How do you manage that risk? Has that been a point that scares you from wanting to put all your best on small solo firms on an assignment that's important to you?
Yeah, I appreciate that getting raised. That risk exists with a firm of any size, right? Because even when working with a large firm, you're not working with the entire firm. And I was in breakout group 6, and we were having a conversation about the consulting firm Encompass, which was a large firm, hundreds of people. We talked a bit about, and even when a firm is 100 people, the points of contact, the team who you might be contracting with, are still just usually a few. And so I think those same risks of someone needing a medical leave or a transition, and we've absolutely had experiences where there's been turnover of the point of contact in the consulting relationship because of retirements, because of illness, because of unforeseen circumstances. And we've managed through those situations, and it doesn't always mean the contract ends. It just means it's kind of a change in the point of contact or in the content expertise. But I don't think those risks are unique to small and proximate firms. In fact, I think those are kind of across the board with any size of contractor. So for me, that's not really even a consideration. I think it's much more about the trust and the reliance that a firm of any size is thinking about who is best placed to do this work from their team and their contacts. And we've definitely had experiences where smaller firms have said, hey, we need another content expert, or we need an expert in a particular skill set or methodology or facilitation skills, to what Pam was noting. And the consultants team and determine who they need to accomplish the work and project. And so I think it's really about recognizing that consultants know what they need to deliver on a project, and trusting them to team and to determine how to do that best.
Thanks, Liz, for that assurance. That is a unique situation for small solo firms. This is very encouraging. Now, Paul Frankel had a question, but he's not here. I'm going to post it. Given all that you've said, why won't funders want to work with small solo firms? Anyone has a thought? It's not just for Pam and Liz or Nora, but everyone else. Why wouldn't they want to work, after all the beautiful things that were said, why wouldn't they want to work with the small solo firms?
I can jump in. Having worked on both sides, so I work with a FACE. My name's Annette, and when I founded a FACE, it was exactly to address this problem. One of the reasons we're a group of 12 people, so when you work with an individual contractor, things can happen. They can have a family emergency or something, so there's not backup, and then it's incumbent upon the donor to clean it up and figure it out. So they can't always rely on an independent contractor to find that backup. There's ways to mitigate that, but it's easier if you went to a small firm or that has backup already built in, and that would be part of your risk mitigation plan from day one. Like we have backup here if somebody falls out. So that's one clear thing. And the other thing is, no matter who you are, you only have a certain suite of skills. And when you go across a group of people, and I'm not talking about it has to be a big group with the firm, because even though we're only 12 people, each of us have our network. But it's like, oh, you need somebody to go to Senecall who knows digital health. We look for that person. And that I know that USAID, at least in global health, was highly specialized. It wasn't enough to say, well, I work in HIV. That's like saying, I don't know, I don't have an analogy, but that's a huge space. Global health itself is huge. So having people that have a suite of skills and that complementarity, and then there's linked to that would be the brainstorming, because when you have a couple more minds in the room, it ignites it. And then when we're not talking to the client, we're talking to each other, right? And we're sparking ideas. So it's not like, okay, this is the way I've always done it, and it's worked well for me so far, so I'm going to keep doing it this way. So I think that exchange is really important, to be flexible and adaptive. Over.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing that in. Any other burning points that we need to make? Somebody wants to make a burning contribution before we bring this to a close?
I wanted to add one thing on that actually. And it's less so like working with small and proximate firms, but working with firms that are why would firms not want to do an RFQ or co-creation process, like the contracting mechanism? And I think in order to engage in this is something that Nora said early on about MacP, was that she knows MacP will provide feedback, right? I think in order to enter into an RFQ or co-creation process, there is a willingness to engage and highly engage. And so there are some organizations that want to contract an evaluation and say, go do the evaluation, talk to us in 6 months. We don't want to talk to you again, right? And so I think implicit in this is a willingness to partner and to put skin in the game in terms of your own time and energy. And so that is an instance where they may not want to enter into that type of relationship.
Thanks, Lloyd, for that contribution. Thanks, everyone, for your thoughts. I'm going to turn over to Carla now for the next phase. Carla?
Excellent. Thank you for facilitating the Q&A, Hippolyte. That was great. Great that we had some time. Again, Liz and Pam and Nora, thank you so much for putting yourselves out there, sharing your experience and journey. So super helpful. Wonderful that we had some time for the breakout rooms. I'm sure that it wasn't enough time and that you'd like to continue the conversation. I'm glad we had a bit of Q&A in this room. For those of us who are going to AEA, we will try to create an event where we'll bring people together. We're just trying to figure out where in the schedule that happens. It seems like a shorter conference this year than before. But anyone who has registered for a webinar is on our mailing list. You can always unsubscribe, but you will get a notice about that. So we're really glad to have you here today. We will send out the recording. We'll send out some highlights from the webinar. We'll keep you posted on what's happening next. And thank you for being part of our movement. Great to have you all today.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.